in this particular principle, according to this particular principle. So passive warming up, and then we have active warming up. So what exactly is passive warming up? So general methods are obviously when you go for jogging, when you do simple exercises, when you do striding, stretching exercises or wind sprint, it reduces anxiety and tension. Now many people don't practice this. Everybody knows about warming up, but people tend not to practice the act of limbering down. There is certain set of principle on. Hello all, my name is Rohit. I take physical education on behalf of Prep School by Vidhyaashram. In today's class, we will be covering our last and final chapter, training and doping in sports. Now when you talk about this chapter, according to the new syllabus, it is one single chapter. But if you look back at the old textbooks, and if you have one of those old textbooks and if you're still stuck with the old syllabus, that is divided into two separate chapters, that is training in sports and doping in sports. So according to the latest chapter, since it is merged into one single chapter, we have to look and study it from that perspective. But even if you have the old textbook, you can still follow that textbook to get the right answers and the right content in order to cover this chapter. So in the old textbook, you will be studying training in sports and doping in sports in order to cover this chapter. But as of the latest syllabus, it is just called as training and doping in sports. Having that said, let's start off with the first session of this chapter, where we will be focusing more on the training part of the sports. So starting off with the first part, we have session overview, where you will be having a look through of what all things we will be covering in this particular session. So starting off with the first topic, we have defining sports training. How do you define sports training? After that, we will look into principles of sports training. Then we will look into the concept of warming up, followed up by different types of warming up, methods of warming up, and what is the importance of warming up. And after that, we will look into the concept of limbering down, which is also called as cooling down, and then we'll look into the importance of that, and then further we'll study about the meaning of skill, classification of skills, meaning of technique, and meaning of style. So all these concepts we'll be studying about the training in sports. Now like I said, the chapter is called as training and doping in sports, but since we divided the whole chapter into two different sessions, we'll be talking about doping part of the chapter in the next session, but this session will focus more on the training part of the sports. With that, let's start forward with the first part of this particular session, that is defining sports training. How would you define sports training? So starting off with the definition itself, according to one of the scholars of physical education, Matt Jew, he stated that sports training is the basic form of preparation for any sportsman. Okay, what exactly is sports training? Sports training is the basic form of preparation of any sportsman. So if you're a sportsman, if you want to prepare yourself up, you have to train yourself. You cannot just wake up and go to the field and play the match. You have to keep your body prepared. You have to train for it. You have to make your body ready for a particular kind of physical activity or sports. So once again, what exactly Matt Jew stated? Sports training is the basic form of preparation of the sportsman. What exactly is it? Once again repeating, sports training is the basic form of preparation of sportsmen. So in simpler terms, sports training is the basic form of training which prepares a person ready or prepares himself to practice in any kind of sports. So that's how we state sports training. I hope the definition of sports training is clear to you. With that, let's move forward with our next part, that is the principles of sports training. What all principles are there when you do any kind of sports training? First, the principle of continuity, then the principle of overload, then individual differences, general and specific preparation. After that, you have specificity, active involvement, variety, warm up and cool down, rest and recovery, ensuring result, and finally you have cyclicity. So you have total 11 principles of sports training which we'll go through one by one. So starting off with the first one, principles of continuity. In this particular principle, according to this particular principle, you cannot just randomly do exercises or training once in a while and expect a good result in the sports. In order to attain a proper fit level of sportsmanship or to be ready for any kind of sports practice, the training should be continued. It should be in a cycle. You should keep on continuing the training in order to achieve a proper result. And then you have principle of overload. That means everybody have a particular kind of a limit when training comes to place. So according to your development in the training, you have to limit your load. That means you should not push yourself beyond what is required. That may damage your tissues or it could cause any kind of sports injury. And after that, you have principles of individual differences, where one trainer must respect the difference between one player and another player and should not put the load based on one particular player who is extremely very well practicing. He should not put weight on one particular individual based on how another individual performs. So this bad practice goes a lot in the sports field. If you have noticed that trainers sometimes, many times, they actually push one player based on the performance of other player. Other player must be playing very good, but you have to believe that, you have to know this, that every player has a space, every player has a pace to get to a certain level, and you have to respect that, and you have to give time for that. So you should not push a person too much beyond its limit. It's always about individual differences. You have to respect that. Okay. And next is principle of general and specific training. That means when you talk about general preparation, we are talking about the general warm-up we do irrespective of what kind of sports you practice. Talking about the specific warm-up programs, we are talking about specifically designed warm-up activities that is exactly made for that particular sports. So if you are a footballer, if you are a basketball player, based on that particular sports, certain training methods have been implemented and found out or researched and is implemented that you should practice, and that will be the specific sports program. And then you will have certain general warm-up and general training program that will be jogging and going to gym and doing push-ups and certain other activities. Those things has to be managed properly. So if you are a football player, you have to practice general specific general program, general practicing, general activities and general training programs. At the same time, you also have to focus on your sports, and you have to develop your body according to the requirement of that particular sports. And after that, you have principles of specificity, where you do training based on a particular specific element of that particular sports. So if you want to develop a particular kind of body for a particular kind of event, then you have to focus on that kind of a training. Then you have principle of active involvement, where you have to stay actively involved in whatever sports you are a part of or whatever training you are daily doing. You have to be actively involved. That means you cannot be lethargic, you cannot be lazy about the fact that you have to go every day and practice it. You have to actively stay involved both mentally and physically in that particular training. And after that, you have principle of variety, where you should do different kind of training. When you go to gym or when you join gym also, the trainer there would give you training for the upper body first. Next week he will train you for the lower body. So based on different cycles, based on different varieties, your overall body will be developed. You should not always do the same exercise, because only certain exercise will only certainly focused on some of the muscles in your body, but that's not the aim that we have over here. We have to focus on every muscle so that overall development is there in your body, so it stays balanced. So principle of variety is very important principle when you talk about the sports training. And after that, you have principle of warm up and cool down. That means here we have a concept of warming up and cooling down. We will expand that a little bit more later in the coming minutes of the session, where we'll study more about warm up and cooling down. But here what you have to understand is the principle states that one person who wants to practice any kind of sports, prior to execution of that particular sports, you have to do a little bit of warm up, so your muscles be ready, gets activated, and it gets ready to be put on to any kind of intensive activity or sports that you're going to do in a while. So before warming up, you should not directly execute any kind of activity that you want. You have to warm up your muscles, you have to ignite your muscles, you have to activate those muscles before doing any activity. And cooling down is obviously, like I said, once you're done with the activity, you have to relax a bit. You should not move on to the next activity. You should give a little bit of break in order for your muscles to take a little bit of breath, take a little bit of gap, take a little bit of rest, and then resume the activity. So that's the principle of warm up and cool down, or limbering down. And after that, you have principle of rest and recovery, where it is important for you to understand that every sportsman after an intensive activity requires rest in order to recover the damaged tissue or the tired tissue or the tissues that are fatigued out. So it's important for every person to rest and recover during continuous intervals of intensive training. And then you have principle of ensuring results. That means you should not blindly do any kind of activity. You should ensure the results are coming good. You should ensure, you should look into the graph of your progress. You should see when you started and when you ended, or if you're half the month through or 2 months through, how much progress is there. Is there any progress at all? If there is any progress, you are improving. If there is no progress, then that means there is something wrong with your training which you have to fix. You have to ensure there is some positive result that is coming out of your activity. Otherwise, it will be an aimless walk to whatever goal you're trying to achieve. And then you have principle of cyclicity, where you have to circulate the activity that you're doing. Just like we discussed about principle of variety over here, where I told you that you have to do different kind of physical activity to maintain the balance of different body muscles. But here, referring to that particular principle, here you have to cycle that. So if you start off with your arm arm exercises, next week you do all the leg exercises, third week you do all the abdomen exercises, then the fourth week you have to again start with the arms. So the cyclicity of different activities and physical training that you do, that you have to rotate, that you have to circulate, that is what the principle of cyclicity states. So these are the 11 important principles of sports training which you should know, which every sportsman should know when that particular part is serious about sports and wants to achieve good results and wants to achieve a greater impact or perform better in the sports. So these were the 11 principles of sports which you have to study, which you have to remember, which will help you not only academically but also in your life. So with that, I hope you understood the principles of sports training. Let's move on to the next part, that is the concept of warming up. We studied about the principle of warming up and cooling down prior to this early in the principles, but here we are expanding on that a little bit more. Everybody knows about warm up. You all have practiced sports once in a while, or in your junior grade, or in your school sports days, or many other occasions. So you know what exactly is warm up, because every sports coach does that to their students or to their trainees prior to any kind of intensive activity. So warming up is what? Warming up is the short-term physical activity done prior to any sports event in order to tone the body and keep it ready for the forthcoming sports event. So basically, what exactly is warming up? Warming up is toning your body muscle in order to keep it ready for any kind of event that is coming or any kind of sports that is coming. You might have noticed that whenever a tournament happens, whenever an international tournament happens, 3 months before that, 4 months before that, all the players, all the teams which take part in there goes to the training camp. Why is it like that? Because they need to warm up their muscle prior to the tournament that they are going to take part in. So it's important for a body or the muscles to warm up. As we studied in the principle of sports training, principle of warming up and cooling down, it is very important for a person to practice the act of warming up prior to any intensive activity to get more better results in the performance. So that is the concept of warming up. So I hope you understood the concept of warming up. With that, let's move forward with the types of warming up. So what are different types are there? Talking about the different types of warming up, we have two types. We have passive warming up and then we have active warming up. So what exactly is passive warming up? Talking about passive warming up, we are discussing about those warm-up techniques where it doesn't require for your body to move much. So wherever your body doesn't require to move much and your body is still getting heated up, that's called as passive warm-up. And what all are the techniques? What are all the methods? When you talk about passive warm-up, the methods will be looking in quite a while in the next part. But here what you have to understand is that passive warming up is that kind of a warming up where intensive physical activity is not required to warm up your body. And talking about the active warm-up, it's exactly the opposite of passive warm-up. That is, you have to do physical activities or different kind of physical intensive activity to keep your body warm or to warm it up. So these are the two different types of warming up, that is passive warming up and active warming up. With that, I hope these two parts are clear to you. Now let's move on to the methods of warming up. What all methods are there when you talk about warming up of your body? So general methods are obviously when you go for jogging, when you do simple exercises, when you do striding, stretching exercises or wind sprint. All of these are the general different warming up techniques which everybody knows about and everybody would have practiced once in a while in their life. And second is warming up with warm water. So you drink a little bit of warm water, you drink a little bit of, hot beverages like coffee and tea and all that, and it improves your body's temperature, it increases your body's temperature and warms that up. And that is one of the example of passive warming up that we studied earlier. So active warming up is more like jogging, simple exercises, striding, stretching exercises and wind sprint. When we talk about passive exercises, passive warming up techniques or methods, we are talking more about warming up by doing a hot steam or carrying out different massage techniques or having a hot drink or through sun bath or by a steam bath. So all these techniques that you see over here is the example for passive warming up. So all these methods in general you can use to warm up your body for practicing any kind of event prior to practicing any kind of sports intensive activity. So these were the methods of warming up of your body. Now let's move on to the next part, that is importance of warming up. We had a little bit of conversation about that early prior to this part, but here we'll study a little bit deep more into the importance of that. First, what is the importance? What is the first importance of warming up? It increases the body temperature. Okay, first it improves your body's temperature, it increases your body temperature, it decreases the viscosity of the muscle. That means the ability of the muscle to contract and stay stiff Why? At the time of activity, it reduces that kind of a risk, because if it's staying stiff at the time of practice of any kind of intensive activity, you could get a cramp, or you could get any kind of muscle pull. So to avoid all that, it helps with that particular part. Next, increases the speed of nerve impulses. So your neuromuscular coordination get improved when the nerve impulses is speeded up or it increases. So that help also it does when you talk about warming up. And it decreases the resistance in the muscle and the capillaries, and it increases the speed of transfer of oxygen and fuel to the tissues, which is required for your tissues to function properly in order to make your muscle eligible to do whatever intensive activity that you're doing. And it increases the metabolic rate of your body, which many people have different metabolic rate, but it boosts a little bit. I'm not telling that people who have a very weak metabolism, suddenly it will become very fast, but whatever existent, whatever default setting is there in your body genetically, it will improve beyond that a little bit if you practice the act of warming up. Next, it reduces anxiety and tension. It enhances the cooling efficiency of your body. That means we are talking about warming up. So when you improve the techniques of warming up, it also improves the cooling down procedure. So it works in a contrast kind of form. Next, it reduces the blood lactic acid. So the blood lactic acid also get reduced when you practice warming up techniques. And with this, I hope you understood the concept of warming up and the importance. Now we'll study about the concept of limbering down. What do you mean by limbering down? Nothing much crazy about this. You don't have to get worried looking at the term limbering down. It's nothing, simply cooling down. So cooling down of your body opposite to warming up is called as limbering down. To bring down the body in a normal state after any competition or training is called cooling down or limbering down. So bringing back the temperature of your body, bringing down the heartbeat of your body, bringing down your body to a rest state. That procedure, that transitional period is called as limbering down or cooling down. Now many people don't practice this. Everybody knows about warming up, but people tend not to practice the act of limbering down, which is very dangerous for a sportsman for a long term. Maybe in the young age, sportsmen will not realize the importance of cooling down, but later as the body deteriorates, as the body stops the regeneration of the cells, at that point of time, if you don't cool down your body prior to any intensive activity that you do next after one intensive activity, then your body will face a lot of kind of problems. So this is the concept of limbering down or cooling down. Once again, I'll repeat, to bring the body in a normal state after any competition or training is called cooling down or limbering down. So this concept you have to keep in mind and study for the examination. You could get this question in one form, 1 mark question, or you could get this question in form of a objective type or any kind of question that you would generally get in section A part. So concept of limbering down is that. Now since we studied the concept of that limbering down, now let's look into some of the importance of limbering down. Why one must practice the concept of limbering down and what is the importance of that. So first importance is body temperature becomes normal. Like we said in the warming up we studied, body temperature increases, which is required by your body to practice or to be more efficient when you do an intensive activity. But after you do practice, after you're done with the intensive activity, when you practice the practice of limbering down, your body temperature becomes down. And then proper removal of waste products. So different waste products get removed properly when you again practice the act of limbering down. And next, it decreases the tension of the muscles, it reduces the chances of dizziness or fainting off, and then its supply of oxygen also is rejuvenated and decrease in the level of adrenaline in the blood. It improves muscles do not remain stiff. Like I said, the viscosity part that we studied in the warming up techniques, that also is applying over here. And then heart rate returns to the initial stage, that is your resting heart rate. So we have a running heart rate or the impacted heart rate or the highest heart rate which it goes when you do an intensive activity, and then we have a resting heart rate. So the heart comes to a normal pace properly at a proper time, and in a shorter period of time if you practice more of a cooling down techniques. So these are the importance of cooling down. So I hope you understood the concept of warming up and the concept of limbering down and why we should do that. With that, let's move forward to our next topic, that is the concept of technique. What exactly is technique? When you do any kind of sports, when you practice any kind of sports, some people have certain kind of a technique to do certain kind of an activity. So those techniques are required in order to perform well in sports. So what exactly is the concept of technique? Techniques are the basic required movements of any games or sports. So when you talk about basketball, we have layups. When you talk about basketball, we have dunks. When you talk about cricket, we have cover shot, we have drive shot, we have sweep shot, we have loft. So different kind of those all techniques, those all things are what we call stress techniques. So every sports will have their own set of techniques which is required for a minimum requirement is there for a person to practice that. You cannot randomly practice or do any kind of shots that you want. There is certain set of principle or the basic strokes or basic techniques that you should know when you talk about any sports. So those particular examples that I gave are the examples of technique. So every sports will have their own set of techniques and one must know if you are serious about that particular sports. With that, let's move forward to the next part, that is the concept of style. So I hope you understood the concept of technique. Now we will study about the concept of style. A style is an individual's expression of technique in a motor action. No two sportsmen are alike in a different factor which determine motor action. So now you understand the concept of technique. But when a person practices that technique, everybody practices in a different way. They have their own signature skill to it. They have their own signature style to it. That particular style is what we define style over here. When you talk about style in general, it could be fashion, it could be anything else. But here in sports, when you talk about style, we are talking about signature moves of certain players. You might know certain players in certain sports, whichever sports you like and whichever sports you follow. There are certain important players, there are certain players, they have a particular kind of a signature move. So all those signature moves and signature tricks are called as style. So what they are doing is actually a technique, but in their own flair of doing it, in their own way of doing it. So that makes it their style. So that is the concept of style. So in order to understand the style, you should understand the meaning and the concept of technique. But now, since you understood the technique, I explained you about style. So technique is what? Technique is the basic required strokes and things that are required or skills that are required in the sports. Style is the way you put it forth. Style is the way you execute that particular technique. So with this, I hope you understood the concept of style. So basically we studied about sports training, how do you define it. We studied about different concepts and different principles of sports training. Then we studied about the warm-up techniques and the methods of warming up of our body. Then we studied about cooling down of your body or limbering down. And then we looked into the importance of cooling down. And finally we studied about technique and style. And what is the difference between that and what is the relation between them. With this, we'll wind up this session over here. I'll see you in the next session with the second part of this chapter, that is the doping in sports. Like I said, the chapter is divided into two different sessions. You have training in sports and you have doping in sports. Doping in sports is more about the drug abuse and the things that goes on in the sports industry, and training in sports is more like the physical training and mental training in order to prepare your body for the sports or whichever sports you are about to practice or whichever sports you are serious about or whichever sports you practice in your regular day-to-day life. With this is me Rohit signing out. I'll see you in the next session, the next part of this chapter. Until then, goodbye and have a good day.